Welcome back, everybody. Henry David Thoreau, of course, is author of Walden. In addition, he was friends with Emerson, who was one of the transcendentalists, and Thoreau was very, very much of an individual. He embraced individualism, which was part of the philosophy of transcendentalism in 19th century America. An example of how much of an individual Thoreau was, he had not paid his poll tax for 6 years, and during this time, in order to vote, you had to pay a tax, right? That's has since been declared illegal. You don't have to pay a tax to vote. So Thoreau had not paid his poll tax because he was protesting the Mexican-American War as well as slavery, two things that he viewed as unjust. So he happened to bump into the sheriff one day, and the sheriff reminded that he hadn't paid his poll tax in a number of years. Thoreau refused to do so, so he was jailed, spent the night in jail, and then his aunt the next day paid the tax. And out of that experience of spending the night in jail for not paying your poll tax came one of the most famous pieces of American writing, which is civil disobedience. I don't know if high schools still teach civil disobedience and how to teach people to be civilly disobedient. I heartily hope so. So taking a look at the beginning of civil disobedience, Thoreau writes, "I heartily accept the motto, that government is best which governs least. And I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which also I believe. That government is best which governs not at all." So in other words, what do we see here? This is what Thoreau and the other transcendentalists believed, is that the arbitrator of right and wrong lies within each person. And that oftentimes, if you see the government acting unjustly, then it's the right of the individual to stand in the way of the government. And that's what Thoreau did. Just a little example there. Thoreau spent 2 years living on the shores of Walden Pond. A lot of people erroneously believed that he was a hermit. He was not. He would periodically go back into town and visit friends, have a meal, get supplies. And the purpose of his time at Walden was not to be a hermit. Then, after a while, he went back to live in society. Now, if you've ever read the whole book of Walden, which, by the way, it's a book, of course, and sadly what we have chapter 2, right, something from the beginning, and then the conclusion, the last chapter. So we have something from the beginning, something from the end, and then there's so much in between that we don't have. So what do we see with Walden? The whole book is that it's many different genres. Thoreau is one of the first nature writers in American literature, so it's part nature writing. It's also a good record of the philosophy of transcendentalism. It's social criticism. So a lot of people, when they go through and they read Walden, they're able to see what was going on in American society at the time. Right, 19th century, this is when America is in fifth gear with shifting over into becoming an industrialized nation. Thoreau did not like that. Thoreau did not like how commercial the country had become, and how it was just so braced upon fixing, turning a dollar, trying to make money every time that people turned around, and that we had really lost, what the moral compass that the founding fathers had pointed America into reaching. And then it's also part social memoir. Now, an interesting thing is that Thoreau began his experiment in living on July 4th, right? Pretty cool, the birth of America. And then he's lived 2 years on the shores of Walden Pond. But if you go through and you read Walden, what Thoreau did is that he took those 2 years and then using the seasons, the 4 seasons as a framework, he represented it as being 1 year. So a lot of people think, well, he was lying. Well, no, he wasn't lying. What Thoreau was doing, this was a conscious effort to put himself out there, put his experience out there as a model for his fellow citizens. And if you think about this, this is a term that we had when we were with Benjamin Franklin and his autobiography, right? This is the Auto-American biography, right? So what Franklin did by writing his biography, he was putting his life out there as an example for Americans, for his fellow Americans, of what he viewed as a good life and what other people should do, may want to do. And Thoreau is also doing that with Walden. So Walden can be read with all these other types of genres. It also can be read as an Auto-American biography. Wow. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and jump in. Take a look at Chapter 2, some selected passages, where I lived and what I lived for. Thoreau might be one of the masters of American literature for quotes. His quotes are just simply amazing. And at the bottom of the opening paragraph of Chapter 2, we have one. A man is rich in proportion to the number of things which he can afford to let alone. So, where I lived and what I lived for. So, what is Thoreau living for? Thoreau wants to take his life and pare it down. He wants to strip away all of those things that he views as unnecessary, which was certainly going on in 19th century America as people started to embrace capitalism and commercialism and were buying things just for the sake of having things. Not that we do that today, of course. Now, if you flip forward several pages, the paragraph begins, we must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake. So find that paragraph there. We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake. So what Thoreau is doing is he's answering the question, where I lived and what I lived for. We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor, that we're able to lift ourselves up through our own purposeful actions. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue, and so to make a few objects beautiful. But it is far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we can do. To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts. Every man is tasked to make his life, even in its effects, worthy of the contemplation of his most elevated and critical hour. So what is Thoreau saying? Is that our lives are the art that we need to work, that we need to lift ourselves up so we can contemplate our own lives. Thoreau wants us to slow things down, to strip things away that are not needed, so we can contemplate the different elements and aspects of our lives.